Hello and welcome. How seriously does Islam in Southeast Asia threaten America and the world? According to one leading US politician, Muslims from that region could be the key to global security. America's interest in Southeast Asia has been waning for decades, pretty much since the end of the Vietnam War. Typically, the West only focuses on Muslims in the Arab world or South Asian countries such as Pakistan and Afghanistan, and the Asian region gets only the headlines when, for example, a bomb goes off in a Western hotel in Indonesia, or when there's a spike in the Muslim wars for independence and separation in the Philippines or Thailand. The story is actually far more complex. Islam is the most widely practiced religion in the region, with about 240 million followers, roughly 40% of the entire population of Southeast Asia. In the post-9/11 era, Muslims in that part of the world, much like Muslims everywhere, began to suspect that the so-called war on terror was a war on Islam, leading to a rise in anti-Americanism. But the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the ongoing conflict between the Palestinians and Israelis have preoccupied the agenda of the Obama administration when it comes to the Muslim world, and Southeast Asia has taken a backseat. So today we ask, can Southeast Asia be the key for America to establish a global peace with Islam? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or email, and we also welcome your phone calls on the show. Joining me today from the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. is Republican Senator Christopher Bond, who is Vice Chairman of the Senate Select Intelligence Committee. He spent the last few years traveling to Southeast Asia and has just published a book on his travels called The Next Front, Southeast Asia and the Road to Global Peace with Islam, which urges the Obama administration to pay more attention to the Muslims of the region and to use so-called smart power techniques to stem the tide of anti-Americanism there. Also with us is Dr. Robert Hefner, a professor of anthropology and the director of the Institute on Culture, Religion and World Affairs at Boston University, from where he joins us. Dr. Hefner is currently president of the Association for Asian Studies and has just returned from a visit to Southeast Asia. And with me here in the studio in Washington, D.C. is Dr. Amitav Acharya, a professor of international relations at the American University, where he also chairs the university's ASEAN Studies Center. Previously, he was the deputy director at the Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Gentlemen, I welcome you all to the show, and Senator, if I could start with you, sir. I was just wondering, isn't it rather provocative calling a book The Next Front rather than perhaps The Next Opportunity? It sounds more like it's based on the idea of fear than building bridges. I wonder does America need another front when the existing fronts are rather messy already?
We needed to get some way to get attention on Southeast Asia. I've actually been traveling to Southeast Asia for over 20 years, and I have been extremely concerned for all of that time that most Americans, when you say Southeast Asia, they say, aha, China. And I said, no, there are several very, very important countries there, and we've paid no attention to them. I started working to try to draw attention to Southeast Asia in the late 90s. And obviously, after 9/11 and the attacks in the United States and the activities of some of the organizations in Southeast Asia, it expanded that. But our book, and I have a co-author, our book is designed to find a better way to understand, work with countries, Islamic countries, and hope that we can show that the Muslim people throughout the world that we want to be a good partner and a good friend. We are not fighting Islam. We're trying to defend ourselves against those who would destroy our way of life and kill us.
That's true, Senator. In the book you've co-written, as you say, with the Lewis Simons, who's the who's the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. You do suggest that Southeast Asian Muslims hold a key to global security when it comes to relations between Islam and the Western world. What is it? What do you think is the basic reason why they would hold that key?
We are saying that this is one area where we have the opportunity to work, because right now we're engaged in conflicts in the Middle East. We have devoted almost all our attention to that part of the Islamic world. But what we're saying is we've had many traditional friends. There are mainstream Muslim countries in the region. We have some spectacular examples of the democracy of Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono in Indonesia, and we need to work with the governments of those countries, work with the people in those countries, understand them better, show that we can be a productive partner. We've done too many things to draw that desire for partnership into question.
Let me bring in Dr. Robert Hefner here, and good to have you with us from Boston University, sir. It's interesting when we're discussing the Muslim world. I mean, it's a term that's very easily used, but I hear more and more, especially among those in the corridors of power in America, that even that term, there's no such thing as the Muslim world because of the diversity of Muslims around the globe. And I wonder how you see your feelings on this idea that something can be very general and vague when referring to the West and the Muslim world.
Well, I think there are great national differences both in the West and, of course, in the Muslim world. But in terms of faith, in terms of their basic profession of a Sunni Islam, most Southeast Asians are Sunnis, and in terms of the practice of their faith, Southeast Asian Muslims are Muslims. They also respond to currents in the Middle East and in other parts of the world, just as other Muslims do. So I think one can talk about the Muslim world. But just like the Western world, we have to recognize that its internal variation, particularly on politics, not so much religion, is great.
All right, Dr. Hamid Avacharya, good to have you here as well, sir. Now, I wonder, how do you see, I mean, your travels, of course, and you lived in Southeast Asia, how do you see any difference between Muslims in Southeast Asia and those in, say, the Arab world?
Well, I have lived in Southeast Asia for about 12 years. Most of it is Singapore, but traveled throughout the region. And I find Southeast Asian Islam more moderate. In fact, it is infused with the pre-Islamic Hindu-Buddhist cultures of this region. And even though things are changing now, you see some influences coming from the Middle East, Arab world. There is some amount of radicalization, but it's still not, it's a far cry from what we call sort of a wave of Islamic fundamentalism.
And how do you, Dr. Acharya, how do you regard Senator Bond's book, The Next Front, and especially as you've written in yourself, you've written Age of Fear, referring to how actually fear can often distort the perspective on Islam?
Well, I was interviewed for this book by Mr. Simmons, but it's off the record. Let me say three things about this book. First, I welcome Senator Bond's interest in Southeast Asia. You don't see a lot of senior U.S. policymakers showing an interest in that region. Of course, the President of the United States, the current President, is an exception. He lived there for a few years. But it's good to see a U.S. Senator actually showing interest in what is a very critical region. My second point is that I think the title of the book is unfortunate. It sort of creates the impression that there is some sort of a war going on. Front, in a sense, harks you back to the idea of a conflict or a war. It's probably, without such a title, the book won't sell very well, but I think the substance of the book is much better than the title. My third point is that I completely agree with him on the kind of policy recommendations he makes for addressing the problems of this region and America's image in this region. I don't particularly like the idea of smart power, but still, I think he makes a very sensible policy recommendations, which I would say that it's not just for Southeast Asia, but the United States should employ to all the regions of the world.
Okay. We have viewer questions on this show. Let's get Ahmed on the line from Canada with his question. Ahmed, good you could join us. What would you like to ask?
Yes, thank you very much for giving me a chance.
Pleasure.
And I really appreciate for Senator thought what he said about the Muslim, to engage the Muslim. But this is not the case. Actually, everybody is staying away. I don't see it until today. Any politician or any professional tackling the real problems. The real problem is in America itself. The neo-Zionist movement. Since I'll give you, for instance, one quote from media, Al-Uqaz. I read it in Saudi Arabia in 1987. You know this writer, what he said? We help the West to get rid of the communists. The turn is coming back to us. They're going to chase us. They're going to kill us. And do we have answer? We know how
Ahmed,
that much.
Ahmed, yeah, I mean, I want to get this across to the Senator as well. I mean, the idea that, I mean, the importance of tackling this, that not is done enough in the corridors of power. Your colleagues, Senator, haven't given the attention that that Dr. Acharya is giving you credit for looking at this region. Is there any risk?
That's the problem. That's the reason we wrote the book. We find that very few members of Congress, either the House or the Senate, go there. We've had battles that had nothing to do with the war on terror. When the United States was selling off the ports that they wanted to liquidate the ports. Dubai World Ports came in, and there was a protectionist sentiment in the Congress, and everybody said, we can't sell our ports to Dubai World Ports. Dubai happens to be an ally, a friend, a country that does very well. I fought on the floor against it, and I lost overwhelmingly because people actually, they're being motivated by protectionism as well as concern and uncertainty about our relations with the Islamic world.
Senator, actually an interesting point you raised there, because
in the Islamic world.
Well, sir, I was going to say an interesting point you raised right in our live station chat room, which goes out live as we broadcast from the UAE, from the United Arab Emirates. You mentioned Dubai ports. Danny writes in saying, is security in the US misinterpreted for global security?
Well, that's one of the problems. I think Dubai does an excellent job of providing security there. But we are interested in providing security with our friends and allies wherever we go. When we go into a country, and that's part of what smart power envisions. We have had an Army unit, the Joint Special Operations Force in Mindanao, and they provide security against attacks by some of the groups there, but they also bring in USAID, our aid component in the national government, to build things, but they have to have protection because there are those in Mindanao who would kill them. But the vast majority of people, I think, welcome the things we can do.
Dr. Hefner, I wonder, is Southeast Asia open to the idea of smart power? Is the structure, the sort of governmental structure across many of those governments, adequate to be able to receive the kind of interaction that Senator Bond is suggesting? A lot of people say there's too much corruption, there's not enough of a clear idea of how to approach that area with smart power.
Well, I think the idea of smart power would be welcomed by many Muslim-majority countries in Southeast Asia. But that said, I would, while agreeing with Senator Bond's general ambition, I would have to say that U.S. policy in Southeast Asia has been characterized by a relatively sophisticated smart power for quite some time. We have had some of the most enlightened programs of engagement with Islamic education, for example, in Indonesia, where we basically just give financial support to Islamic educational institutes. And we're not guiding them, we're not telling them what to do. It's Muslims acting in their own interest, but seeing common interests with the United States. And those programs run out of USAID go back 20 years.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to ask...
That said, I think...
Well,
please.
Let me say there's
Senator, I'm going to just ask you to hold on for 1 second, only because we've hit a hard break here. We have to pause for just a moment. More of our discussion when we continue in just a moment. Don't go away.